I am joined yet again by my dear friend, the incredible Father Deacon Dragani. We're going to be talking about why not become Eastern Orthodox. The title might be a bit, I guess, controversial, but we're going to be, I'll say it immediately, we're going to be incredibly respectful to our Eastern brothers and sisters, as we always are, as I always am on this show. But before we even dig in, I want to ask Father Deacon, how have you been?
Oh, I've been very good, William. Very busy with a lot of work stuff and church stuff, but on the whole, it's been a blessing.
Incredible. You have been incredibly busy right now, and I know you have an incredible channel that you work on that really the goal is to introduce the Byzantine faith to the world. And I know right now you have that a little bit on hold right now as you work on a number of other projects. But before we're done, maybe we can talk about that a little bit, because even though you might have that on hold right now, you've got plenty of videos for people to check out on there, right?
There's a lot to watch. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is great. Yeah. So you know what? Here's the one thing that I think would be the most important to ask from the get-go, Father Deacon. And it is perhaps something that it perplexes our fellow Catholics. And when I say Catholic, Latin Rite, Eastern Rite, even our Orthodox brothers and sisters, when this question comes up, sometimes people don't know how to answer it. Our Eastern brothers and sisters, are they part of the church to begin with?
Yes, I would say they are. And that's really the Catholic position on it, that we're connected mystically. They are part of the church, but it's not a complete communion. Mm-hmm. And why do I say they're part of our church? Well, ultimately, the church and the sacraments go hand in hand, and they have the same 7 sacraments that we do. Mm-hmm. The faith is almost essentially the same. There's far more that unites us than divides us. So yes, it is part of the same church. The union visibly may be imperfect, but it is still the same body of Christ, the same Catholic Church.
And that union, we have no doubt about it. We don't pretend that union is perfect. We recognize there are breaks in what we pray and hope will be a full communion again one day. But we're living in a time where not only within Catholicism, within Orthodoxy as well, it's a very tumultuous times that we're living in. And I think that really is the message that everybody really needs to realize. Very tumultuous times we're living in. Do you think that maybe a little bit more could be done in terms of charity, love towards our fellow apostolic Christians, and working together, realizing, trying to focus on our common beliefs rather than trying to draw an incredible rift between one another, especially in the tumultuous times that we're living in? I mean, look at it like this, Father Deacon. There's a whole lot that we share in common in communion. There could be a whole lot we could do to be a bit more charitable, isn't there?
I think so. And on the point of tumultuous times, my goodness, I was watching the news or listening to the news on the radio during the week. I had to turn it off because the world is literally insane right now. I mean, horrible things happening all over the place. All kinds of strange murders.
Yep.
A lot of children victims. I've been seeing that a lot lately. Very strange. And of course, there's the chaos over in Eastern Europe, the invasion of Ukraine and everything that's come with that. And then, of course, within Orthodoxy itself, there's a schism there between Moscow and its group and Constantinople and its group. And then Catholicism is actually going through some rough periods as well, both here in the United States, but also abroad with the whole situation in Germany.
Yep.
I would say these are very tumultuous times. And perhaps one could argue that right now, all apostolic Christians need each other more than ever before. And I think now is the time to really unite, because I think the world has gone insane. St. Anthony the Great had a prophecy that one day the world would go mad, so mad, in fact, that when people saw a person who was not mad, they would say that person was insane. And I think we're there. I don't want to focus on one thing in particular, but, when infanticide is defended as being a right, and when a man can declare that he's a woman, if they'll pretend that he's a woman, or when somebody's claiming that a 5-year-old can magically switch genders, That's an insane world. That is a world that's gone completely mad. And I never thought it would get this bad. I never thought it would get this bad. So I think we need each other more than ever before.
It really is a world that really clearly you can tell that there really is something wrong when you turn on the news and you find it being normalized bodily mutilation.
Yes.
It's really terrible in tumultuous times. And the one thing that I appreciate the most when it comes to our Eastern brothers and sisters, and today we're particularly talking about Eastern Orthodoxy. We don't want our Oriental Orthodox friends to think that we don't know they exist. We absolutely do. We love you all as well. And we recognize, the one thing that we recognize, Father Deacon, that many people may not realize, because I when I give talks at parishes, whether I'm talking about our Holy Mother Mary, whether I'm talking about transubstantiation or various other things, salvation, even if you will, I talk and show the people how we share so much with the apostolic churches, and at times people will perk their ears up and think, okay, well, there are other churches that we view as having a valid priesthood. Yeah, there are, and we believe. Let me ask you: would it be correct to say that our Eastern brothers and sisters have a valid priesthood?
100%, absolutely.
Yeah.
The Catholic Church totally recognizes that.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think that is one thing that really we've got to emphasize. This is not our opinion.
Right.
This is official church teaching, isn't it?
Official.
Yeah, and that is not going to change. They've got a valid priesthood. Now, you brought up something that as you know very well, it hits very close to home for me when you talk about the German bishops, the scandal over there. Let's be very clear. It's pretty much a full-blown schism over there because they don't care what Pope Francis has to say.
No, they don't care.
But the Pope has been very clear that what their agenda, because they're very agenda-driven, is an incorrect agenda, a distorted vision of church teaching. And so that's a problem. People see that, and it's a very great problem. Now, I want to be very fair as well. I've got family in Germany. I've got near and dear friends as well. Now, we don't think all of Germany has this problem, but we recognize that Germany in and of itself, they've got bishops that are problematic. We recognize there are parts of Bavaria where the faith is beautifully traditionally celebrated. We just wish all of Germany would get on board with that. That would be wonderful and beautiful. But here is one thing we don't hear about very often, Father Deacon. Are there any similar issues within Orthodoxy? Because I have Catholic friends of mine that will say, well, goodness, I can't deal with it anymore, William. I can't deal with all of the scandals. I am going to really look into discerning Eastern Orthodoxy because you know what? You're not going to encounter these kinds of scandals over there. Now, Father Deacon, that really does, to me, strike at a bit of and I want to be respectful when I say ignorant, in the sense that maybe people just don't know that the grass really isn't greener on the other side all the time. So are there perhaps any issues within over there on the other side as well?
Oh yeah. They have a lot of the same issues that we do. We don't see it as much because they're much smaller in this country, right? What I mean is they're numerically smaller, right? There are far less Eastern Orthodox Christians than there are Roman Catholic Christians in this country.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't clear, I'm Eastern Catholic. If everyone's watching who doesn't know what that is, we're Eastern Christians who are in full communion with Rome.
Yep.
But the Eastern Orthodox, who we're talking about specifically, they're not in communion with Rome. But they're their own churches. The problem there, though, is they're much smaller than us numerically in this country, so we don't necessarily hear about the issues they're dealing with. But they've had a lot of the same problems we've had. They've had, priests and monastics who are sexually abusing people, just like Catholics have had. They've had all kinds of infighting over, homosexuality, like we've had. There was a whole situation just a few months ago where one of their leading archbishops, baptized the child of a homosexual couple, which in and of itself isn't problematic if there's a reason to believe that child be raised in the faith. Yeah. But I think it was done in such a way that it was at least treated by somebody as a photo op, right?
No doubt.
Whether the archbishop intended it to be or not, it was treated as a watershed moment, as a photo op, and it caused a lot of scandal, a lot of division within Eastern Orthodoxy. They've also got the whole issue too of Eastern Orthodox politicians being honored and celebrated who are completely pro-abortion.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a whole situation where George Stephanopoulos was made an archon of the Ecumenical Patriarchate.
Yeah.
And, he did a lot to promote pro-abortion politicians. So they have a lot of the same problems that we have. It's not that different in some respects. Now, it is different in others. You're not likely to find chaotic liturgies on a Sunday morning at an Orthodox church. You're not going to walk in there and find, people dressed in spandex dancing around the altar, holding up bowls of incense. I've seen that in Catholic churches with my own eyes. I've witnessed that, not in video, but in person. You're never going to find that in an Orthodox church. You're not going to find priests dressing up in costumes during liturgy in order to entertain people. They don't have the same kind of liturgical chaos that Catholicism has, but a lot of the other problems are very much the same.
And I want to be very clear for the audience. Within Catholicism, we're not arguing every mass is illicit or along those lines. Indeed, I've attended many reverent and beautiful Novus Ordo masses, but what Father Deacon is saying is absolutely correct. It really does seem that within Catholicism, you encounter liturgical abuses a whole lot more, from the ranging from priests. I know of priests in certain parts of Mexico that dress up as wrestlers as they give the mass. Unfortunately, a lot of the people don't realize how wrong it is, and they love it. They flock to those churches for it. Really is unfortunate. Ranging from that to Protestant songs being used at mass, which you find that quite prominently within a lot of the Latin Rite Novus Ordo masses. Not all of them, but you encounter liturgical problems.
To add to that, the vast majority of Novus Ordo masses I've attended are very respectful.
Without
the vast majority, and I've attended quite a few that are downright beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out here to the local Roman Catholic Diocese of Altoona, Johnstown. Mm-hmm. They have a phenomenal bishop. They have a lot of really good liturgical practices from what I've seen. Their priests, in my experience, tend to be pretty much with it.
Incredible.
The bishop here, Bishop Mark Barchak, is awesome. Great guy.
Really?
And
okay.
He had a special liturgy for Ukraine at his cathedral, back when the invasion began, and he invited myself and my pastor there, to be concelebrants. And it was one of the most beautiful liturgies I've ever seen. And it was in the Roman Rite with incense and chant, and it was just gorgeous.
Wow.
But at the same time, you do find crazy people experimenting with things more often in the Roman Rite for whatever reason. And, I'm a big fan of the movie Nacho Libre with Jack Black, but I don't want Jack Black as a wrestler celebrating mass for me.
I'm with you there. I thought the movie was done, in my opinion, and people don't get it wrong. I'm not supporting Jack Black himself. I think the movie was done in a very tasteful manner. I did not
awesome
find
movie.
I didn't find it distasteful at all. I enjoyed that movie. I laughed my head off when I watched it.
Actually, a very respectful presentation of the Catholic faith.
Yeah, I totally agree. He never broke his vows at all.
No.
It was a very, very respectful movie. I'm sorry if anybody hasn't seen it, and I gave you a major spoiler there, but you should have seen it by now. It's a very good movie. I got to ask you then, your thoughts on the liturgical abuses. Why is it that, because you'd be very hard-pressed to encounter liturgical abuse at a Byzantine liturgy. Why is it that we find these kinds of liturgical abuses much more prominently in Latin Rite parishes? Any thoughts on that? Do you have any thoughts? Have you ever pondered that?
I have some thoughts. I think the main thing is part of it is in the Roman tradition, you kind of developed two parallel ways of celebrating the Mass throughout history, the High Mass and the Low Mass. So the High Mass was very similar to how we celebrate the Divine Liturgy. Everything is sung, there's incense, there's a sense of like a deep beauty and reverence to it. And in our, in the Eastern churches, Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic, that is what we do pretty much every Sunday.
Right.
We don't have a concept of a low Mass. Everything is sung, incense, the whole shebang every Sunday. Now, in the Roman Church, they developed this idea of a low Mass, which is like a quick, economical, bare bones Mass. And those two kind of existed parallel side by side throughout the centuries, the Roman High Mass and the Low Mass. And then at Vatican II, there was this movement to reform the Roman Mass. The Novus Ordo was intended to be kind of a return to a more primitive version of the Roman Mass. It was not meant to be anything new or creative. It was meant to be something more traditional in a sense.
Mhm.
But what happened was when the Roman Novus Ordo Mass was issued, in a lot of places, the High Mass kind of vanished and the Low Mass became the Mass.
Yeah.
And the Low Mass in the Novus Ordo is just bare bones enough that it can give the perception of leaving room for experimentation.
Yeah.
Now, if you actually look at the rubrics, there isn't a whole lot of room for experimentation if you actually look at the rubrics.
Correct.
But because of how bare bones it can be, I think a lot of people saw it as opportunities for enculturation. And in some cases, they saw it as opportunities for creativity. And I think that may have fostered a lot of what happened. I think most of the abuses that occurred weren't done with bad intentions. People weren't thinking, oh, I want to make the most irreverent mass I can make. I think these are people who, in a misguided attempt to reach people, tried things they thought were new and creative, thinking it would bring in people. But I think in the process, it created something that was not attractive in the slightest.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. Now, when it comes to Eastern Orthodoxy, I have encountered multiple Orthodox that will tell me that within our faith, they'll say, we have a very similar belief to you all in terms of believing like in prayer for the dead and in purgatory. And then I've encountered probably not a whole lot, but probably a few that will then say, no, you know what, we believe in toll houses and what have you. My point of bringing up that as an example, I could have used many other examples, is to point out how not all Orthodox agree on every little piece of information. And of course, I'm not going to paint a perfect portrait within Catholicism and lie to the audience and say, well, you know, you come to the Catholic Church and it's all rainbows and it's all everybody's incredibly united. But I think the difference is we can go to our catechism, we can look at our official teachings and see exactly what the Catholic Church teaches. Is this an issue, by and large, within Eastern Orthodoxy, the tendency to, because of that lack of authority, to perhaps not agree on some things that may be essential?
Right. That is an issue. And here's what it comes down to. So like you said, in Catholicism, we all know what we're supposed to believe.
Yeah.
There's no question what the Catholic Church definitively teaches and believes. You can pick up the Catechism of the Catholic Church. You can read through church documents. Everyone knows what we're supposed to believe. Now, there are a lot of people who call themselves dissenters, perhaps, or who want to change church teachings. But even then, they acknowledge what the church teachings are. They just don't agree with them.
Yeah.
In Orthodoxy, it's a little different because there are a lot of areas that are gray enough that they're open for debate. And the reason for that is in Eastern Orthodox ecclesiology, as it's developed, the real high authority on anything is an ecumenical council.
Right.
The ecumenical council is the ultimate authority. However, they've been unable to have an ecumenical council for over 1,000 years. And that's the issue. So if you say that the ultimate authority is an ecumenical council, but you can't have an ecumenical council, that means as far as ultimate authority goes, you're kind of stuck at a certain place in time. You're almost frozen in time as far as ultimate authority. And that makes it challenging to adapt to the modern world and to adapt to modern problems and modern issues. So things such as, artificial contraception. How do you respond to that when you don't have a definitive teaching authority that can address it?
Yeah, that's a very good point there. Artificial contraception, divorce and remarriage, just really a lot of things. I see your point there.
Although, in fairness, the divorce and remarriage thing is a little murkier than people realize.
Without a doubt.
Because that was the norm in Eastern Christianity in the Catholic Church for, I think when the Catholic and Orthodox churches attempted to reunite, Lyons and Florence, it wasn't even an issue for debate. There was it wasn't seen as significant enough to even argue over.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other thing, though, but the reality is that that's a murkier issue. But other more modern things like contraception, it's hard to respond to it. It's hard to respond to it when you don't have an ultimate authority.
Very difficult to respond to it. And I think, to me, you talked about ecumenical councils. We looked at, particularly if I can think of the role of the Pope at the 6th Ecumenical Council, at the 7th, even at Chalcedon, very clearly you've got, even before that, I would argue, but incredibly, that seed has flowered to where you can clearly see the papal supremacy, I would argue, very clear in Third Constantinople and Second Nicaea, very, very clear, even at Chalcedon. Is from the Orthodox perspective, I hear very often, and rather than replying or responding, kind of lashing out at them, I think we need to stop and step back and say, okay, how can we break this down for our Orthodox brothers and sisters when they say they clearly do not like the idea that we have had multiple ecumenical councils where very clearly they have not been, they have not had a seat at the table. How can we, and I'd ask you for your thoughts on this, Father Deacon, how can we rightly call them ecumenical councils if a number of these have lacked our Eastern Orthodox friends?
Yeah, and by the way, I understand what you mean by the term papal supremacy. I know what you mean by that, but I personally avoid the term because I think it's unnecessarily loaded. And today you're not going to find the Catholic Church even using that terminology anymore. When I find the term papal supremacy, it's Orthodox apologists using it to smear Catholics.
I guess what I kind of meant was by the time you get to Third Constantinople and Second Nicaea, you clearly have the flowering of the seeds of papal infallibility. Is pretty much kind of what I meant.
There's definitely an authoritative leadership
that's
beginning to be recognized in some tangible way.
Yeah, and I would even argue at Chalcedon. I mean, the Tome of Leo, without a doubt, that's something that you really cannot argue against. But so how can we? Clearly, to me, in a respectful manner, how can we call those ecumenical councils if we don't have our Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters? Some of them they don't have a seat at the table there.
Right. So what I'm going to say here might be a little controversial to some people, but I'm going to say this. What we call them isn't necessarily written in stone in the sense that, the Catholic Church has called them ecumenical councils, but at the same time, the Catholic Church recognizes that there's a different status between those and the first group, the first ecumenical councils that included the Orthodox before the schism. Those ecumenical councils have a higher status, even in Catholic teaching and in Catholic authority, than the later ones without the Eastern churches. So there's clearly a difference there in how the Catholic Church views them. I mean, I think even Pope John Paul II addressed this on multiple occasions. Pope Paul VI at one point tried calling the later councils general councils of the Western Church. He actually tried moving away from the term ecumenical councils. But whether we call them ecumenical councils or not, there is an understanding that the first batch with the Orthodox involved have a higher level of authority, a different type of beast in a sense. That doesn't mean the later ones aren't authoritative, but not to the same importance, not to the same degree. So if we both acknowledge that those first councils have a greater importance than the later councils, if we both acknowledge that, I think perhaps we're not that far off. We're not as far off as it seems. We may call those ecumenical councils, but clearly the other ones that are agreed upon as ecumenical by both the Orthodox and the Catholics have a different status, And, maybe it's a situation where we're using the same words differently. Maybe when the Orthodox say ecumenical council, they're implying something of that status. When we say it, we're implying something that maybe doesn't always have the same level of authority or the same level of importance, is what I should say.
So you would say that without a doubt, there's something special about those early ones where that was very clear that we were clearly united. We're not trying to disrespect our Oriental Orthodox brothers and sisters at all.
No.
We recognize
nothing but love for them. Nothing but love.
Yeah.
They're heroic martyrs. They're people who really stand for the faith.
Incredible martyrs. Yes. But just so that we can be clear, we could perhaps, if engaging in further dialogues which had reunion on our minds, which really should always be in our minds, really, with our brothers and sisters in the apostolic faith, perhaps a compromise could be made in the sense that we would recognize those earlier councils with perhaps a different kind of, perhaps more elevated status, but not denigrate the validity or the authenticity of later councils. Would that be okay? I can see that, because I don't think it would be ever possible to denigrate the incredible importance of a Trent. For instance, the Council of Trent, which I would even argue that Trent had incredible influence upon later gatherings of the Eastern Orthodox when they had to deal with the problems of Protestantism.
I would say this is all a matter of words.
Right.
A different interpretation of words. I always use this example with my students. I have students sometimes who come from Protestant traditions, and they hear about Catholics praying to saints.
Right.
And they get very scandalized. And the reason is the word pray has come to mean something different in Protestantism than it does in Catholicism. The word pray originally means to ask, to make a request. That's all it means. That's why there's a document in courts called the prayer for relief. It's a document. But in the Protestant tradition, the word pray has come to imply worship as well as request. So in Protestantism, when they use the word pray, they're meaning worship and request, or worship and communicate. Where in Catholicism, the word pray simply means to ask, ask. So when Catholics and Protestants discuss this, often we talk past each other because we're using the same words very differently. I think this is a similar situation. I think that ultimately the Catholic and Orthodox churches have room to agree here. They have room to agree here. It's just a matter of what one side means when they say ecumenical council.
Right. I get you completely. Yeah, without a doubt there. Now, the thornier issue, way thornier. Papal infallibility. Would there be a way to work with that? Because I mean, be quite honest, there's no way we can roll back Vatican I, and I mean, it would be quite problematic. What would occur with something like papal infallibility? Do you think reunion with either our Syriac Orthodox friends or our Eastern Orthodox friends would ever be possible with that dreaded papal infallibility looming over our heads? And I don't mean literally dreaded. I'm joking around.
I would say the very misunderstood papal infallibility.
Without a doubt. It is incredibly misunderstood. And I want to be very fair. I think from both sides. I think from the Orthodox side and from the Catholic side. The Catholic side, some individuals, and I'm not naming anybody in particular, some individuals think that Francis can do no wrong. Now, we give great respect to the office of the Holy Father, but we don't think that every single thing Pope Francis does is correct or what have you. We think that he can definitely err in his private judgment and what have you, and that's the case for every pope throughout history. But it has been incredibly misunderstood, hasn't it?
Oh, huge. And I think it's, like you said, by both sides. On one hand, many of the Orthodox Christians, when they hear papal infallibility, they're thinking we mean the Pope is a dictator who can't make mistakes. Where he is this authority who must be obeyed on everything, which isn't the case. The Pope has limits. His authority is not unlimited. There are very specific, clear limits. On the other hand, I used to encounter a lot of Catholics who were ultramontanists to the extreme, where if the Pope spoke, it was the word of God. And if you're disagreeing with the Pope, you are a heretic. Ironically, a lot of those same people are now like railing against Francis constantly. I've seen so many ultramontanists, turn into conciliarists in the past several years. It's kind of ridiculous.
Going from one extreme to the other, it really
exactly.
Really is.
What I would say is the issue with papal infallibility. I think this is also an issue where terminology plays a role.
Yeah.
I think when we call it papal infallibility, for better or for worse, that kind of centers the infallibility on the Pope.
Right.
But the infallibility is not on the Pope.
Right.
It's the church that's infallible.
Yeah, the protection of the church, without a doubt.
So how I would approach it, if I had any authority over this whatsoever, and I have zero, I would drop talk of papal infallibility and talk about the infallibility of the church. Christ's promise
Right.
that the gates of hell would not prevail against it. And then,
Mhm.
at the same time, Jesus is giving, symbolically giving the keys to Peter, making him the steward.
Right.
And then I think that implies that there's some protection going on there, not just over
The office.
the Pope, but the church as a whole.
Of course, the church. Of course, the
but
church.
the office itself has some level of protection. And I
Right.
would say the Pope is not infallible, in the sense that the infallibility is not focused on the Pope. It's
Okay.
not from within the Pope, not as a person, not even the office necessarily. The infallibility is in the church, but in the office of Pope, you exercise the infallibility of the church.
I see.
I think if we really center the infallibility on the church squarely and talk about it that way, it's much more reasonable to Orthodox ears.
I think that does sound much more reasonable. Would it be reasonable as well to point out that Peter, and when I say Peter, I mean St. Peter and his successors, can be the voice piece for the church as well, similar to when St. Peter stood up and made a very key decision at the Council of Jerusalem, but of course respected in his fellow bishops. Would that be fair as well to, if we dialogued and we sat down at the table, but we also recognized, okay, we look at it from this kind of a perspective, all the while recognizing that where Peter is, you find, and I don't mean it in an authoritarian dictatorship manner, but you find a figure that was meant to be the shepherd of the faithful. Would that be okay? Do you think that would be acceptable terminology for them?
I think for most Orthodox, it absolutely would be.
Right.
I read a lot of Orthodox stuff, right? And
Yeah.
there are different schools of thought, but a lot of Orthodox Christians, I think, would find that acceptable, or at least a place where they could begin and work with.
Well, it's biblical. They should be able to.
They should. And
Yeah.
if they're approaching the church fathers honestly, they would.
Yeah. No doubt.
The problem is a lot of them approach the church fathers through the lens of later interpretations from many
Sure.
centuries later.
Oh, way later. Yeah, no
And
doubt.
that's the issue there. But
Yeah.
when we're dealing with the Orthodox, we have to consider there are different factions in a sense, like there are in Catholicism.
Without a doubt. And that will always be an issue.
And one faction in Orthodoxy that's significant is the anti-Western faction.
Oh, yeah.
And by the anti-Western faction, I mean individuals who define themselves against the West. They define the Orthodox faith against the West, and they define themselves against the West.
Yeah.
And you find that current in some strands of Orthodoxy. It's especially strong on the internet, probably more so than in real life. But on the internet, it is strong. The anti-Western crew who basically, if the Pope says the Earth is round, no, it must be flat. It's that kind of level of reaction.
But what I think, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, Father Deacon, I wanted to add this point, because whereas that sounds very negative, I think on the flip side of it, a lot of these people are not the Orthodox that you're going to run into in churches, or those that are practicing their faith in a fervent manner. They're the typical hostile ones, a lot of them very young, that you encounter on the internet that are incredibly anti-Latin. And these, I dare say, are not the ones that are fervent churchgoers. So that, on the flip side, that is a positive thing.
Yeah, my experiences with Eastern Orthodoxy are very mixed.
Yeah.
In person, up until recently, my experiences were almost universally positive. I've been to many Orthodox churches, was welcomed as a brother, treated with love and respect.
Yeah.
I have a lot of Orthodox friends who are awesome people of deep faith, who frankly are holier than I am by far.
Oh, yeah.
And, it was generally positive, but then I go online and I'd go on an Orthodox forum, or an Orthodox, videos, and I'm hearing fire and brimstone, anti-Catholic this, anti-Catholic that. And some of the stuff was so anti-Catholic and so extreme, it would make Jack Chick blush. I'm encountering that. And then it was almost like two different worlds, real life Orthodoxy and internet Orthodoxy. But what I've seen is the internet Orthodoxy more and more is reflecting some things in real life Orthodoxy. In my area, an Orthodox priest came into the area who was actively trying to, proselytize Catholics. Right. He updated the website for his church to have some anti-Catholic stuff on there.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing that more and more in real life now. A friend of mine, a young man from one of my parishes, he saw, he heard about this gathering of Orthodox young adults. He's Eastern Catholic. He figured he'd go and be welcomed as a brother. He got there. As soon as they found out he was Eastern Catholic, they started calling him a uniate. Yeah. And they began harassing him and trying to convert him. And it was such a horrible experience. He left, shaken. He was shaken by it. Yeah. So I think more and more we're seeing a real life manifestation of the online craziness. But the vast majority of Orthodox, your average Orthodox Christian who goes to church on Sunday and prays, is not like that.
And I dare say that the massive majority of these incredibly anti-Latin individuals, I'd be shocked if any of them had even read the prominent figures within Orthodoxy. Very rarely find any of them that even know who St. Gregory Palamas is, who read Mark of Ephesus, who even know who Joseph Bryennios, Cabasilas, or any of these figures are, really. Maybe they've read little quote bites here, but that have actually read them. I'll be honest with you, Father Deacon, I haven't even found one of these online individuals that have read these figures. They'll grab a book and they'll shake the book and they'll say, well, look, I've read this. And it's very limited what they've read because a lot of it has not been translated into English. Right. And it is an unfortunate thing.
They have certain quotes to circulate, out of context. They refer to all the time. But, like, for example, over the summer, I did a show with Michael on Mark of Ephesus, and I spent a lot of time.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time just delving into it, reading through the documents, reading through what I could find of his that was translated. A lot isn't. Right. What you find is that Mark of Ephesus was not nearly as hostile towards Catholicism as people seem to think. Now, he became more hostile after the Council of Florence because he felt he was done wrong. He felt he was personally wronged there, and he had reason to believe that. He did, legitimate reason to believe that. Yeah. But if you look at Mark of Ephesus before the Council of Florence, there wasn't even a hint of anti-Catholicism. Yeah. And even afterwards, his anti-Catholic stuff had more to do with personalities than necessarily with doctrine, with a few exceptions. But like you said, the people who hold these figures up and use them as hammers against Catholicism actually haven't read them.
They have not, because if they read Mark of Ephesus, they'd find that on a lot of things, he is not a friend of their modern day cause.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I mean, not at all. And I want to add that we have a great, we owe Father Kappas a great debt. He's translated a lot of Mark of Ephesus.
He has.
He really has. It's so hard to find a lot of his stuff in English, but you look and you read his stuff and you'll find how really modern day Orthodox should really not be rejecting the Immaculate Conception. Mark of Ephesus is very clearly, very clearly.
I have to give a big shout out to Father Kappas on this, because I never read Mark of Ephesus. I dismissed him. I dismissed him because of how I saw him used. Sure. And then I read one of Father Kappas's articles in which he was presenting Mark of Ephesus in a very different light. Yeah. And that got me curious, and maybe I want to actually read Mark of Ephesus. So I went down this whole rabbit hole because of Father Kappas, and I'm glad that I did, because it was a good rabbit hole to go down.
Without a doubt. And I think he's also very misunderstood when it comes to purgatory. And we did a whole show on that. Go and read. And look, we're going to be very fair, because at Florence, we're going to be very clear, there was problems on the Catholic side and misunderstandings on the from the Greeks as well. And this comes out later on when we've got even the successor of Mark of Ephesus will come out and will note how many Greeks misunderstood what the Latins were saying about purgatory. But I'd invite people to actually read the actual text of Mark of Ephesus rather than listening to your famous online person telling you what they believe. Go and read them, and you're going to find a different, perhaps a different world than you were probably, told to believe in.
Without going too deep into this, I think I feel bad for Mark of Ephesus because what happened at Florence was very unfortunate because he actually wanted unity. He was pro-union, and he actually, believed in papal primacy. It is with nuance, right? Yeah. He thought that it went to Constantinople, but that it could go back to Rome. So he had a different understanding of how it transferred, right? But the idea of primacy was something he believed in. But when he actually got to Florence, well, what happened was they walked into a trap, not a trap set by the Pope. The Pope really wanted union, but there was a war going on of sorts between the Dominicans and the Franciscans.
Yep.
And it was like a theological battle of great ferociousness. And the poor Orthodox
war going on, I believe, as well. A political war
there was.
Well, yeah.
And the poor Orthodox delegates who showed up, they were there to establish union with the Catholic Church, and the Pope wanted union between them and us. But certain factions within the Dominicans and certain factions in the Franciscans wanted to fight that war, and they used the Orthodox as pawns or obstacles in their little battles, and that completely soured the whole council. It ruined it, really. And I understand why Mark of Ephesus left really jaded after that experience. I totally get it. It's very tragic because it's such a missed opportunity.
It really was a missed opportunity, and I'm going to be very clear. It should have been reunion. It really should have been. Yeah. It's just an unfortunate thing that it wasn't. When it comes to and don't want to go too far off the topic. When it comes to actually, it's on the topic. When it comes to the actual debating of the texts, in regards to purgatory, at least. You find that at the end of the day, there's a whole lot that both sides agreed upon, really.
Oh, yeah.
It was really just a lot of difference in terminology, different emphasis on certain things. So I understand one area where I understand exactly where Mark of Ephesus was coming from was the idea of opposing literal hellfire. Or literal fire, actually, if you will, a literal physical fire. Yep. But very interestingly enough, a literal fire never became a part of the Catholic dogma. It is not a part of the dogma today either. But that was an actual concern there. And I think even today, you might encounter Catholics or even Orthodox that think Catholics believe there's a literal fire that we encounter in purgatory in the afterlife. And that has never been bound up in the dogma, has it?
No, never. There's never been Catholic teaching. And ironically, we've talked about this before, the reason why Mark of Ephesus was so troubled by people talking about the fires of purgatory is he thought they were talking about praying people out of hell.
Right.
And he was very bothered by the idea of praying people out of hell. He believed that hell was permanent, as far as he could see, right? And he thought the idea of people being let out of hell was a major theological error that he strongly opposed. That's why he was so strongly opposed to purgatory as understood as a place of fire.
Right.
And it's kind of ironic that some of the people now who quote Mark of Ephesus out of context are the same people who are arguing for praying people out of hell. It's very, very ironic when you think about it. Which is
ridiculous. It really is patently ridiculous because the apostolic churches classically have never understood the ability to pray somebody out of eternal damnation. That is very, very problematic and a definite concern to have. But I totally get the idea of maybe a modern day person looking at early fathers. One particular one comes to mind being Hippolytus, and then them hearing about souls in the underworld undergoing suffering and purification before entering into light, and maybe confusing that for hell, but it's not the eternal hell that is being talked about. It's very metaphorical to talk about them being, and a lot of fathers talked about the purgation as being an actual state. Some talked about it using a fiery language. But again, a lot of these are just theologizing what is occurring in the afterlife. Without a doubt, we know it's very possible that one may undergo a post-mortem purification in the afterlife, but the church has never defined that you're going to actually go to a physical place. And without a doubt, I prefer, whenever I read the many fathers that talk about a fire, I prefer to look at that fire as many fathers would have, that being the divine cleansing love of Christ, which
Exactly.
I think a lot of sins.
That's exactly what it is. Exactly what it is.
And I think
It's all a metaphor to try and understand that which our minds cannot grasp.
Yeah, without a doubt. You know, one thing that blew me away, I've got to mention it briefly, Father Deacon. I was talking with an incredible mind. He's a scholar on St. John Chrysostomos, and I remember talking to him, and it's just incredible how he showed how John Chrysostom, when he talks about purgatory, when he talks about the fire in purgatory, he would later go on to show that he doesn't mean a literal fire, but rather he meant the cleansing love of the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. It really is incredible once we stop and we realize the magnificent mind of the early church fathers.
Oh, absolutely.
And on that very same note, I have encountered a lot of what you talked about, that being an unfortunate anti-Latin sentiment that at times you encounter. And I want to be clear, there are a lot of incredible Eastern Orthodox gentlemen online, scholars. I'm very near and dear friends with the Reverend Dr. Kleinevert, Father Ramsey. There are multiple Orthodox that I'm scholars that I'm very good friends with. But then you find some that, you know, are so anti-Latin, Father Deacon, that they'll even disparage their own saints. Like they'll trash Augustine, or they'll trash others at the old that are part of their own communion of great saints, all in the mind of being anti-Latin.
I've had some try and argue with me that St. Augustine's not even a saint. You know, wow. I'm like, they're so ignorant of their own tradition. They don't realize that. He's blessed. He's blessed Augustine. He was never canonized. They don't understand that has nothing to do with the modern process of venerable blessed canonization. They don't get it. But I've had them try and argue that.
Who argued that?
I've had some Orthodox
people. Okay. You've had. Oh, I thought you. Okay, yeah. I thought you said it. Okay, yeah. Wow, that really is an unfortunate.
Well, extreme ignorance.
No doubt.
The person who said that, I don't even remember who it was, but it was somebody online was saying it. And as I read the comments, I'm like, oh my gosh, the level of ignorance here is shocking.
And you have to be incredibly ignorant if you're going to disparage your own saints. I want to be very clear. If you're gonna trash your own saints, there really is a problem there.
Because the Orthodox call him Blessed Augustine, but that doesn't mean that he's not canonized as a saint.
Of course not.
Back when the title was given to him, it had nothing to do with venerable, blessed being a path to canonization. That had nothing to do with it.
Nothing at all. Now, one thing that I don't talk about it a lot, Father Deacon. In fact, I rarely ever talk about it. And for respect to my Eastern Orthodox brothers and sisters, when I converted from Reformed Protestantism, I took a long time looking at Eastern Orthodoxy. And I remember on my journey towards Catholicism, one particular friend of mine who I encountered was an Eastern Orthodox scholar by the name of Father Kleinevert. And I remember we dialogued a lot. We talked a lot about theology. I've known him for many years now. Eventually, I chose Catholicism. And who would have known? We've remained very good friends even to this day. Oh. So that is very possible. But the reason I bring that up is I came into a church. And back then, perhaps, I don't remember exactly what my mentality was, but today people tend to come into the church and tend to think, well, you know, we're coming into the true Church of Christ, which we're not arguing we're not saying that's not true, but then they think everything is going to be honky-dory, everything is going to be perfect, everything is going to fall right into line. There will be no scandals. Everybody in every aisle of the church are going to be incredibly welcoming. And a lot of the times that really is, you know, the furthest thing from the truth. So I've got to ask you the main question: why not become Eastern Orthodox in the end? After all these kinds of scandals we know about, problems you may have at parishes and what have you, why not just convert
to Eastern Orthodoxy?
Correct.
I know many people who have gone from Catholic to Orthodox. I don't fault them, and they have their reasons. I'll tell you why I couldn't. There are many reasons, but for me, probably the biggest one, the number one reason is this. I've experienced the grace of God working through the Catholic sacraments.
Yeah.
I know that the Eucharist I receive on Sundays at my church is the body and blood of Christ. I have no doubt about that. I know that my baptism is a real baptism. I know that when I was ordained, the holy orders I received actually did change me and strengthen me.
Yeah.
I'm doing things now I never thought was possible because of that, because of the strengthening of the sacrament. I can't deny that God has worked through the sacraments of the Catholic Church. So why am I saying this? Well, in Eastern Orthodoxy, whether or not Catholic sacraments are valid is an open question.
Yeah.
And you'll find Orthodox Christians who believe the Catholic sacraments are valid, like the Ecumenical Patriarch believes that very much so.
Sure.
But then you find a whole bunch of Orthodox people who are very vocal online who say the Catholic sacraments are null and void, that we're worshiping bread, we don't have the Eucharist, our baptism is worthless and meaningless, and they will rebaptize Catholics. And those people don't represent the mainstream in Orthodoxy, but it is a legitimate opinion.
Yeah.
With an Orthodoxy, that's a legitimate viewpoint. There's no one to clear it up, right? There's no ecumenical council to clear it up. So no one can give the final word on it. So in Orthodoxy, it's a very legitimate, not necessarily mainstream, but legitimate opinion to say that the Catholic Church has no valid sacraments.
Yeah.
And I feel personally that if I went to Orthodoxy, I couldn't join a church where that's even an open question. I couldn't do that. To me, that'd be a betrayal of Christ working through the sacraments of the Catholic Church. That's how I see it. Now, not everyone who joins from Catholicism to Orthodoxy sees it that way, and I think most of them don't. But I personally would see it as a betrayal of something I know to be true, and I can't be a part of that.
That was a fantastic answer. And I think that for me, because people have asked me, what really is what pulled you towards Catholicism? Now, there are a lot of things that pulled me towards apostolic Christianity. I'm not going to go over that right now. What are the reasons why I chose Catholicism over Orthodoxy? And at the end of the day, I recognize there are a lot of Orthodox that are allowed to hold as a theological opinion, validly believe in the Immaculate Conception. But by and large, you're finding a lot of them just moving farther and further away from that, even though they're great saints and they're great figures of the faith, held to it. We've talked about them today. And of course, the papacy as well. There were reasons why I ultimately chose Catholicism. But Father Deacon, you brought up something that I was not, maybe out of ignorance, but over 20 years back, I didn't encounter a whole lot of Orthodox that would have told me, you know what, William, I don't think you all have a valid Eucharist, or I don't think your baptism is valid. But I'm encountering more and more today. And I don't say that it is a majority. I'm not arguing that, but it's growing, becoming quite more vocal online. And I'd like to even say, even among some of their scholars. And I think it, more than anything else, more than leading to fighting and going for the jugular for one another, I think what we need to begin doing, Father Deacon, is sitting down at the table together and saying, look, we're part of the early apostolic church. We are apostolic Christians. Okay, where are we talking past one another? Are we talking past one another? Because we very clearly are. If one side is denying that transubstantiation is indeed occurring at the within the other churches, they're denying that. So I think more than anything else, in charity, we need to do that. Sit down and talk, and perhaps, if possible, hash out those kinds of differences.
Yeah, and we are. There are actual dialogues taking place that are making real progress.
Yeah.
There's an official Catholic Orthodox dialogue. I know that one of my professors from when I was in the seminary at St. Cyril Methodius, Father David Petrus, I studied at St. Cyril Methodius when I was a doctoral student in theology, and I was very blessed to take a number of courses from Father David Petrus, and he's involved in that dialogue on the official level, and they're making real progress. And the official representatives in these dialogues have worked through a lot of the problems. Metropolitan Callistos was a big part of that, and he really was very active in working through these differences. And I think that represents the mainstream in Orthodoxy. The problem is what used to be seen as a fringe voice, the ones denying Catholic sacraments, they've become louder and louder and louder, and they've become dominant in a lot of online quarters. And I'm meeting more Orthodox in real life who believe that now.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is a big step backwards, a huge step backwards. But again, how do you argue with them from an Orthodox perspective? Because there is no final word on it. There can't be a final word because there's no ecumenical council.
Yeah.
And that's why you also find things like, I found this article from a respected Orthodox theologian. His name escapes me at the moment, but he was a respected Orthodox theologian arguing that St. Francis was possibly demonically possessed.
Goodness.
And again, that's an acceptable position within Orthodoxy. Again, not in the mainstream one, but there are a lot of Orthodox people who believe that. Yeah. I've seen that online. I've seen whole threads of people talking about how demons work through St. Francis of Assisi. And, it's just ridiculous. It's completely, utterly ridiculous. But that's the trend that I see, and it deeply concerns me. And it deeply concerns a lot of Orthodox people, too. I have a lot of Orthodox friends who are very troubled by all this, and they can't stand it. They don't want people who think that way representing their church.
I think of the one message that I would like to send out to everyone watching the show would be that to not allow those other voices to build within you an anti-Orthodox kind of sentiment, the way an anti-Latin sentiment has been built up into them, because people tend to react. And at the time, reactions tend to be very strong.
That is so true. And I've got to say, I am blessed that before I got involved in the internet scene, so to speak, that I knew many Orthodox Christians in real life who are, for lack of a better word, Christians. Yeah. They act like disciples of Jesus and they behave that way. And I've known many of them in real life over the decades, and those people made a very positive impression on me. So I knew them, right? Yeah. Because once I got more involved in the online world of Eastern Christianity, I saw a very different picture. And I've said to myself on multiple occasions, if I didn't have those years of experience with real life Orthodox Christians, my experiences online would lead me to think that Orthodox Christians are vicious, nasty, hate-filled, vindictive trolls, because that's 90% of what I see online, which does not reflect real life.
No.
But unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't come from areas where there are a lot of Orthodox churches like around here where there are.
No, they really don't. Yeah.
And a lot of Catholics I know have developed a very negative vision of Orthodoxy because their only encounters with Orthodox are these vicious people who seem to dominate the internet. And again, some of them are nasty, the most unchristian people I've encountered. And ironically enough, they oftentimes sign their things, sinner so-and-so, right? They have this fake humility and they act like they're so pious, but all they do is judge. They might as well be Pharisees.
Yeah.
I don't want to throw that around too lightly because, I'm guilty of that to a certain degree. We all are. But man, some of these people, they live on tearing others down. And that's not what Christianity is about.
And that really has never been what Christianity is about. And I think that's the important message. I have had numerous debates against Orthodox scholars, and I returned to dialoguing with them, remaining friends with them. Mm-hmm. And I think the important thing, I'm going to be debating in 9 days against an Orthodox scholar on purgatory. Funny enough, the one thing that I think is so interesting is my goal in the debate is not to go into the debate to clobber my opponent, but to really try to, at the end of the day, say, hey, we believe a lot of the very similar things. Can we come to perhaps an agreement here at the table? Because really, when we talk about the apostolic faith, we talk about a big table where we can all sit down upon. It isn't like the Protestant model where really the Protestants aren't even there at the table because they believe radically different. And that very thing, that very reason that we believe, we share the belief, we venerate icons, we love iconography, we love Holy Mother Mary, we believe in prayer for the dead, We believe in the Eucharist truly being the body and blood of Christ. So many things we have in common. We need to work on really not being at each other's throats much more, I'd say.
I think your approach to the debate is absolutely the right one.
Yeah.
I would hope that the Orthodox participant would approach it the same way, because in that particular debate, I think the real victory would be walking away having found common ground.
Yeah.
Because really, there's so much common ground there.
There's a lot of common ground there. There really, truly is a lot of common ground there. But Father Deacon, this has been an incredibly edifying conversation. We've hit the hour mark, and I know the audience sometimes are like, you know what, you go too much over an hour, and people have very incredibly busy schedules, and want to be very respectful of that. So I think we've covered the essentials, and I think you've done an incredible job. Before we wrap up, I would like to give you a moment to put in a plug for anything you may be working on. You want to talk about that incredible YouTube page you have on hold for a moment, but you've got that there where people can check stuff out. Anything you want to talk about right now?
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about first is the Becoming Byzantine series. Yeah. And it's a series of videos I did with collaborators, Father Daniel Dozier, Father Michael Wynn, Robert Klesko from EWTN. We also had other people participate, like Father Joseph Matlack and a few others. And it's a whole series of videos working through the Ukrainian Catholic Catechism, Christ Our Pascha. Wow. This is a catechism that came from the Ukrainian Catholic Church, but really it applies to all of the Byzantine Catholic churches, which include, Ruthenian, Ukrainian, Melkite, Romanian, and others. But it's a vision of Catholicism that's fully Eastern, but yet fully Catholic at the same time. The catechism, Christ Our Pascha, is amazing. So we work our way through that series. So if you go on YouTube and type in Becoming Byzantine, you'll find it. We finished the catechism.
Wow.
So we worked our way through it. But we're going to be doing a new series probably like maybe January or February, I forget when, dealing more with spirituality rather than the catechism this time. But check that out. And also I have a website, east2west.org, EAST, the number 2, west.org, where I have articles on there and I answer questions about Eastern Catholicism, and I have links to most of my videos there as well. So check that out if you get a chance. That's it. Yep, that's it.
There we go. There we go. Father Deacon, thank you very much for your time. I look forward to dialoguing with you again, and we'll have you back on the show very, very soon. Father Deacon, thank you for your time. God bless you, my dear friend. I will talk with you again soon.
It's always a joy, one. Always. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.